On the map of the USA, one can easily point to the most mysterious place, a small desert area known as Area 51. In recent years, it has become the subject of memes and discussions. Many have heard of it, but the true events occurring there are known to few. Area 51 would hardly have achieved such fame without Bob Lazar, who gave an interview to a small television company in 1989. He claims that he worked at a secret military base and that it is there that the government hides alien spacecraft and conducts classified experiments, which he allegedly witnessed with his own eyes. The tale of gray aliens and flying saucers may seem absurd until one delves into the deep history of Area 51. In this context, Lazar's claims gain some credibility, at least partially. This video presents the complete story of the most secretive place in America. After all, why have government officials hesitated to utter the name Area 51 for nearly 50 years? When and for what purpose was this mysterious site created? Why has some information about it remained inaccessible even to American presidents? Finally, what is really happening there? This is the true story of Area 51. Let's begin with a quote from Churchill, who described Russia as a riddle wrapped in mystery. This phrase perfectly fits the theme of our video, as this secret has many layers. The first of these concerns the very existence of Area 51, which is now an indisputable fact. However, 15 to 20 years ago, the situation was not so clear. For many, Area 51 remained on the level of myths, akin to Atlantis or El Dorado. In 2013, U.S. President Barack Obama officially uttered the words Area 51 for the first time. This happened just 10 years ago. Only in the last 10 to 15 years, thanks to declassified documents, journalistic investigations, and interviews with former employees, have we been able not only to confirm the existence of Area 51, but also to answer the main question: what exactly have American authorities been hiding there for over half a century? Early in the morning, a reconnaissance plane takes off from a secret CIA base in Pakistan. At the controls is Gary Powers, an experienced American military pilot tasked with the most challenging mission of his career. He must reach the southern border of the USSR, cross the entire territory of the Union to the north, and land in Norway. Powers is equipped with a powerful camera capable of capturing high-quality images from a distance of 20 kilometers. This is an exceptionally important altitude at which the secret reconnaissance aircraft U-2 can operate. The U-2 aircraft represents a significant achievement for American engineers. It was rarely detected by radar, and even modern Soviet MiGs, flying at significantly lower altitudes, could not intercept it. Over several years, Soviet missiles did not shoot down a single such aircraft over the territory of the Union, even when it was in the radar's sights. For Gary Powers, flying the U-2 was not his first mission, nor was it the aircraft's first mission over the USSR. However, this operation became a true test. No reconnaissance plane had previously crossed the Soviet Union from border to border. Powers would have to remain at the controls for 13 hours, while morning was just beginning in Moscow. Since this U-2 visit to the Soviet Union is not the first, it is clear to everyone who is behind it and what its purpose is. The situation is further aggravated by the fact that this occurs on May 1st. Khrushchev believes that in this way, U.S. President Eisenhower is mocking him and he gives the order to shoot down the aircraft at any cost. About an hour and a half after takeoff, Gary Powers flies over Uzbekistan and soon reaches his first target, the Tyuratam Cosmodrome, from which Gagarin will launch into space a year later. At this moment, he notices jet trails below, indicating that the U-2 has been detected and Soviet MiGs are in the air. However, Powers does not panic and continues his mission, flying at an altitude inaccessible to them. Yet, as the U-2 passes by Sverdlovsk, the sound of shell explosions surrounds him. Soon the aircraft begins to shake violently and it rapidly loses altitude. Powers realizes that he has been shot down. Both wings are torn off, and the remaining part of the aircraft, along with him, is hurtling downward. Oxygen tubes still connect him to the craft, so the falling U-2 continues to drag the pilot along with it. Powers experiences intense G-forces before disconnecting the tube and beginning his free fall. After a few moments, the parachute opens. When the Soviet missile shot down the U-2, it disappeared from the CIA radar screens, clearly indicating its crash on Soviet territory. For the intelligence agency, this is certainly an unpleasant situation, but not catastrophic. According to their calculations, when hit by the missile, the aircraft was supposed to be completely destroyed, and the pilot was expected to perish. If, however, the pilot is somehow rescued, he would have a suicide pill with him to avoid capture. CIA leadership was confident that the Soviet military would not be able to extract important information from the wreckage and from the pilot in unmarked gear. This meant that they would not uncover the main secrets of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft, including those related to Area 51. The history of the latter begins with the atomic bomb. The Manhattan Project, during which the U.S. developed nuclear weapons, became the first true secret operation involving around 200,000 people across dozens of sites nationwide. Outside of this project, no one had any idea about it. Harry Truman became president in 1945, and only then was he informed about the Manhattan Project. He had not previously had access to this information, despite holding high government positions, including that of vice president. At Truman's direction, an existing military base in the desert in the western part of the country was chosen for nuclear testing in the early 1950s. This vast area of land, covering nearly 3,500 square kilometers, became the only testing ground in the U.S., where Area 51 later emerged. In their view, espionage was an alternative means of preventing a nuclear catastrophe. By learning about the enemy's plans, one could effectively counter their actions. With the onset of the Cold War in the late 1940s, the Soviet Union became the main strategic adversary of the United States. Since recruiting spies on its territory was nearly impossible, the Americans decided to use reconnaissance aircraft. However, the existing models did not meet the requirements, as clearly demonstrated during the Korean War. Soviet MiG-15s successfully shot down American reconnaissance planes. This situation called for new solutions, and the development of the U-2 aircraft by Lockheed was intended to address these previous issues. Engineers created a model capable of flying significantly higher than Soviet MiGs, making it inaccessible to interception. For the Air Force, the U-2 project was less interesting, as the aircraft could only conduct reconnaissance missions. The primary focus came from the CIA, for which espionage is a key area of activity. The secret project was led by Richard Bissell, a high-profile CIA official. It was he whom President Eisenhower tasked with selecting a location for testing the new aircraft, and the optimal choice turned out to be the dry Groom Lake in the Nevada desert. There was already a temporary runway there, and the area, surrounded by mountains to the north and south, facilitated secrecy. Additionally, nearby was the Nevada test site, where nuclear tests were conducted, which confirmed the high level of confidentiality of this location. The area of the Nevada test site was divided into several sections, which were assigned sequential numbers, such as Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 17, and so on. Various tests and developments were conducted in each of them, primarily related to nuclear weapons. The new base at the edge of the test site was designated as Area 51, marking the beginning of the history of the most secretive place in America in 1955. The Nevada desert is a harsh and sparsely populated area, where summer temperatures are so high that eggs can be cooked on metal surfaces. Powerful winds can shake the hangars, and local residents need to wear special footwear to protect against rattlesnakes. Employees at the new secret facility rarely referred to it as Area 51, preferring terms like Groom Lake or the ranch. According to the first U-2 pilots and mechanics, this territory was extremely secretive from the very beginning, which was reflected in all aspects of operations. Work was divided among several departments that did not interact with one another. Each employee only knew the information necessary for their specific function, and only the leaders understood the overall picture of what was happening. All workers, from pilots to technical staff, underwent strict background checks and signed confidentiality agreements. The production facilities of Lockheed were located in neighboring California, where parts for the U-2 were created independently from one another. Afterward, they were sent to Groom Lake Base, where the assembly of the complete reconnaissance aircraft was finalized. Thus, only those who worked in Area 51 could see the U-2. Most pilots and mechanics lived in California with their families and commuted to work daily on special planes that returned them home in the evening. Family members of the employees were unaware of their loved ones' actual activities. One engineer recalled that his wife and children believed he was repairing televisions. A striking testament to the secrecy was the incident involving an aircraft crash. In 1955, one of the planes transporting employees from Area 51 crashed in the Nevada mountains. The relatives of the deceased only learned about the true activities of their loved ones in the early 21st century when the case documents were declassified. Only a limited number of CIA employees were aware of the U-2 development. The heightened secrecy of the project significantly contributed to the emergence of myths about unidentified flying objects and conspiracy theories related to government attempts to conceal the truth. In the late 1940s, a wave of reports about flying saucers began in the United States as numerous people, including civilian and military pilots, claimed to have seen objects in the sky exhibiting speeds and altitudes beyond the capabilities of contemporary technology. This surge coincided with a rapid advancement in aviation. Ordinary citizens and even professionals had no knowledge of secret projects within the military-industrial complex, such as new jet aircraft or missiles. and therefore logically perceived these unidentified objects as extraterrestrial. This does not mean that all UFO sightings were related to the testing of new weaponry, but a significant portion of them could have been. In the 1950s, similar situations repeatedly arose with the U-2. The outer shell of this reconnaissance aircraft was made of aluminum, and it was not immediately painted in a dark color. As a result, the silver U-2 reflected sunlight exceptionally well and stood out against the night sky. When civilian and military pilots encountered the shiny object, which was operating at an altitude that was unreachable for that time, they could hardly believe their eyes. Against the backdrop of the surge in reports of flying saucers, special units were established within the Air Force and the CIA to investigate cases involving unidentified objects. However, due to the secrecy surrounding certain developments, including the U-2, the personnel investigating UFOs did not have access to the most classified projects. As a result, they were genuinely unable to explain many incidents involving the U-2. This contributed to the spread of conspiracy theories. Some of those working in these units claimed that the government was concealing the true truth about UFOs and extraterrestrials. The CIA also contributed to the popularization of conspiracy theories about UFOs by launching a media campaign in the early 1950s aimed at debunking incidents involving unidentified objects. Television broadcasts and articles were intended to provide reasonable explanations for what people had observed, ranging from natural phenomena to camera malfunctions. However, these efforts proved ineffective. Publications about mysterious aliens and unexplained phenomena garnered significantly more attention than the materials intended to debunk them. Years later, it became known that the CIA funded media campaigns aimed at debunking UFOs, while simultaneously secretly supporting departments investigating unidentified incidents. This only strengthened the confidence of ufologists that the government was concealing the truth about UFOs. Moreover, in the second half of the 1950s, the leadership of the Central Intelligence Agency realized that rumors and theories about flying saucers could work to their advantage. People would be more likely to discuss UFOs rather than actual secret weapons developments. This approach positively impacted the reputation of Area 51 in the eyes of the public. On July 3, 1956, a pivotal moment in the history of the U-2 reconnaissance aircraft occurred. Pilot Harvey Stockman completed the first flight over Soviet territory. The aircraft took off from West Germany, reached Leningrad, conducted the planned photography, and returned to base without incident. This mission was crucial for the CIA, as it was necessary to demonstrate to President Eisenhower that the U-2 justified the costs and resources incurred by American taxpayers for its development and production. During the first flight over the USSR, pilot Stockman took numerous high-quality photographs, including images of Leningrad that clearly captured everyday moments in the lives of ordinary Soviet people. This served as a significant signal for Americans, indicating that the Soviet Union was not merely a giant militarized environment where everyone was preparing for war against the United States. However, it was a disappointment for U-2 project leader Richard Bissell and President Eisenhower that the Soviet military detected the reconnaissance aircraft during its flight. This indicated that the U-2 was more vulnerable to radar than had been anticipated. Since ancient times, humanity has sought to apply principles from the animal kingdom to create flying machines. Although the MiG interceptors and ground-based missiles were unable to prevent its mission, Eisenhower was concerned that such an open act of espionage could lead to nuclear war. Nevertheless, Khrushchev decided not to publicly disclose this incident in order to avoid undermining the reputation of Soviet defense. Over time, U-2 flights over the USSR resumed, leading to a sort of cat-and-mouse game between the United States and the Soviet Union. Despite attempts to make the aircraft less detectable by radar by painting them with special dark paint, this proved ineffective. As a result, the Soviet military successfully detected the U-2 and attempted to intercept it with MiGs or shoot it down with missiles, but without success. On May 1, 1960, everything changed after Gary Powers' flight. The downing of the U-2 over Soviet territory marked the beginning of the end for this legendary reconnaissance aircraft. For the United States, the incident involving Powers' secret mission turned into a serious embarrassment. The CIA assured President Eisenhower that the pilot had not survived and had no identification on him. As a result, the official version stated that the downed aircraft belonged to a civilian and was engaged in meteorological research for NASA. Khrushchev insisted on acknowledging the fact of espionage and issuing an apology. He understood that the Americans were unaware that, at that time, Soviet intelligence was interrogating the living pilot Powers. The United States continued to assert that it was a civilian scientific mission, and therefore no apology was necessary. This political game lasted nearly a week, and ultimately, Khrushchev publicly announced the detention of spy Powers. Eisenhower found himself in a difficult position. Not only had the fact of U.S. espionage become widely acknowledged, but he, as president, had publicly lied by presenting the aircraft as civilian. According to Powers, the Soviet authorities sought to determine the locations of his U-2 training flights, which the pilot was fully aware of. However, during the interrogations, he indicated a different base, Utertown in a neighboring state, sticking to a pre-prepared narrative that was also supported by NASA. The press release from the space agency claimed that the U-2 training flights took place at the Utertown base, which served as disinformation to divert attention from Area 51. This narrative was primarily intended for a domestic American audience. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union had long been aware of Area 51. Although the USSR lagged significantly behind the U.S. in the development of reconnaissance aircraft, it excelled in missile construction, nuclear weapon production, and space technologies. The Soviets had satellite images of Area 51 for several years. While the quality of the images left much to be desired, information about the secret facility was known. In 1961, several key events occurred that had a direct impact on the U-2 project and Area 51. Initially, there was the downing of Powers. In his memoirs, he claimed that he did not disclose any important information about the aircraft or Area 51 during the interrogations, but this is difficult to verify. It also became clear that the U-2s were not as invulnerable as previously thought and could be shot down by missiles. Then came the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion, a secret U.S. operation aimed at overthrowing Castro's government in Cuba, which ended in failure. As a result, the operation's leader, Richard Bissell, a CIA officer and head of the U-2 project, was forced to resign. At the end of 1961, the USSR conducted tests of a thermonuclear bomb known as the Tsar Bomba, which is considered the most powerful man-made explosive device in history. This event escalated the nuclear arms race to a new level, and it became critically important for the Americans to monitor Soviet military facilities. Thus, the U.S. needed a new reconnaissance aircraft that would significantly surpass the U-2 in speed, altitude, and invisibility. Thus, by the early 1960s, the history of the U-2 aircraft in Area 51 came to a close. Although the aircraft continues to be used primarily for civilian NASA projects, it is no longer considered modern or secret. Over the past 3 decades, many CIA documents related to this project have been declassified, largely confirming information obtained by journalists from those involved in the development of the U-2 or from materials that became publicly available. The history of Area 51 could have ended as early as the late 1950s when tests of so-called dirty bombs, powerful explosive devices with radioactive components, were conducted nearby in Area 13. After such tests, the area remained contaminated for many years and required special cleanup. Area 13 is located just 15 kilometers from Groom Lake. As a result of the test explosions, Area 51 temporarily became an abandoned ghost base, where no activities took place. The facility owes its revival and potential prosperity to bats. Faced with the challenge of creating a reconnaissance aircraft that would significantly surpass the U-2, engineers at Lockheed turned to the nature of these flyers for inspiration. The stealth aircraft does not imply physical invisibility, but rather an inability to be detected by radar. Radars operate somewhat like bats, which navigate in the dark using echolocation. By emitting sound signals, they determine the distance to an object by receiving the echo that reflects off it. By listening to this echo message, a bat can identify the object and ascertain how far away it is. Thus, aircraft invisibility can be achieved by making it either absorb radar signals or deflect them away. Additionally, the speed and altitude of the reconnaissance aircraft will significantly enhance its stealth and protection. Compiling speed, altitude, and invisibility into a single aircraft seemed like an extremely challenging task. However, the engineers at Lockheed succeeded in this endeavor. In mid-1962, tests of the new secret reconnaissance aircraft Lockheed A-12, also known as the Oxcart project, began in Area 51. This titanium-constructed aircraft could ascend to an altitude of 25 kilometers, which exceeded the ceiling of the U-2 and significantly surpassed the altitude of commercial airliners of that time. The A-12 also had the capability to fly 3 times the speed of sound, allowing it to theoretically cover the distance from New York to Paris across the Atlantic in just 1.5 hours. Moreover, it was virtually undetectable by radar. Even today, such a description evokes admiration, and in the early 60s, the A-12 was more impressive than all the alleged extraterrestrial flying saucers combined. Since its inception, Area 51 has been a secret facility, but the testing of the A-12 aircraft heightened security measures. In 2007, CIA documents related to the development and testing of the Oxcart A-12 project were declassified. These materials revealed that in the early 60s, the CIA actively monitored all mentions of Area 51 and the new aircraft. Phone calls, messages, and correspondence from journalists discussing the secret development were under surveillance. Even ordinary citizens could raise suspicion if they mentioned anything related to the area or the A-12. The tightened security measures applied to all personnel at Groom Lake Base. In addition to strict standard procedures, there were also unusual requirements. For instance, all test pilots of the new aircraft had to be married, and their wives were subject to specific conditions, including good mental health and no issues with alcohol or other addictions. Naturally, the wives had no knowledge of their husbands' activities as pilots. Kenneth Collins was one of the pilots who participated in the test flights of the latest A-12 at Area 51 in the early 60s. By that time, the base had significantly expanded with additional hangars built for personnel. Pilots and other employees flew to Groom Lake from California on Mondays and returned to their families on Fridays. During one of Collins's flights on the A-12, he encountered control issues, and he miraculously managed to eject and survive. As a result, the pilot faced a brutal interrogation involving hypnosis and truth serum. The CIA sought to ensure that the pilot was telling the truth and was not involved in the incident. Ultimately, only after several weeks did the investigation determine that the incident occurred due to a malfunction of one of the sensors. During this time, the CIA collected all the debris from the A-12 to prevent it from falling into the hands of potential spies and to protect the valuable titanium from which the aircraft was made. With the onset of A-12 testing at Area 51, the number of UFO sightings in the region sharply increased. Pilots of commercial aircraft were particularly alarmed when they observed objects in the sky flying much higher and faster than their modern airliners. Against the backdrop of widespread interest in the UFO phenomenon, many quickly jumped to conclusions about the origin of what they had seen. In 1962, NASA was conducting standard tests of the X-15 rocket plane, and photography became a part of the test flights. In one of the images, accidentally captured in the corner of the frame, an object resembling a UFO was noticed. Since the X-15 was not classified, NASA regularly published photographs from its tests, leading to speculation about the confirmation of UFO existence. Meanwhile, NASA employees were unaware that on the same day, tests of the A-12 aircraft were taking place at a neighboring secret base, and it was this aircraft that appeared in their photograph. In 2007, among the declassified documents, a record was found in which a CIA employee reported on this situation. In 1966, Walter Cronkite, the country's leading news anchor, presented an extensive television report on mysterious objects in the sky. Witnesses and employees from UFO investigation departments shared inexplicable cases. Meanwhile, an invited high-ranking representative from the Air Force was unable to disclose information about the U-2, A-12, or Area 51, as only a small circle of CIA and Air Force personnel were aware of these projects, and details about the developments became available only half a century later. The United States Air Force also played a significant role in the activities at Area 51, primarily carrying out technical tasks related to the A-12 aircraft. This included transporting project participants to the base, supplying fuel, and providing necessary equipment. Over time, the Air Force and the CIA became rivals in the struggle for control over Area 51. While the Air Force was developing its own reconnaissance aircraft with stealth technology, largely based on the A-12's advancements, it became evident that the results of these billion-dollar expenditures would lead to one of the projects being sidelined. To preserve the A-12 project, the CIA director needed to find a purpose for it. At that time, the Vietnam War was unfolding, which proved to be quite timely. The conflict between North and South Vietnam became one of the key chapters of the Cold War, with the USSR supporting one side and the United States the other. Due to the Soviet Union's successes in missile development, North Vietnamese forces were effectively shooting down American aircraft. To locate missile installations, the United States required an effective reconnaissance aircraft, and the A-12 fit that need perfectly. When talking about Area 51, we typically refer to the United States, yet few are aware of the existence of a similar secret facility in Japan. For conducting reconnaissance operations of the A-12 in Vietnam, the CIA needed a shelter for takeoff, landing, and maintenance of the aircraft located nearby. As a result, in 1967, Kadena Air Base was established on the Japanese island of Okinawa, similar to Area 51. This military base was subject to the same secrecy measures as its American prototype near Groom Lake. One of the pilots sent to the new base was Harvey Stockman, who a decade earlier had made the first flight on the U-2 over the Soviet Union. The new A-12 aircraft significantly surpassed its predecessor, boasting high speed and the ability to maneuver at great altitudes. In over 90% of cases, it remained invisible to radar. With the help of the A-12, American forces effectively identified the locations of Soviet missiles in the possession of the Vietnamese, and soon the number of downed American aircraft significantly decreased. During this period, the A-12 even helped avert a new war. This refers to the so-called Pueblo Incident. In January 1968, this American vessel was located several dozen kilometers off the coast of North Korea, conducting scientific research. On board were 80 people, including both scientists and sailors. This version served merely as a cover. In reality, the Pueblo acted as a reconnaissance ship equipped with secret equipment and documentation, and part of the crew consisted of CIA personnel. The ship was spotted by a North Korean military vessel, and although the Pueblo was in international waters and had not violated any borders, the Koreans initiated an attack. One crew member was killed, and the others were taken prisoner. When U.S. President Lyndon Johnson learned of the situation, he was furious. The Department of Defense immediately developed a plan for a massive strike on North Korea, which effectively meant the beginning of a new war that the U.S., given its ongoing campaign in Vietnam, could hardly afford. However, CIA Director Helms proposed an alternative, conducting a reconnaissance operation using the A-12. Pilots could invisibly survey all of North Korea from high altitudes in search of the Pueblo and its crew. If they were found alive, it would open the door for a diplomatic resolution to the conflict. Ultimately, that is exactly what happened. During the A-12 flight, they managed to capture not only images of the ship and the crew members held captive, but also to confirm the absence of preparations for war by North Korea. All these operations were carried out undetected by enemy radar. 11 months later, the American prisoners were released. By the end of the 1960s, the SR-71 Blackbird project was officially adopted. Despite the successful results achieved by the A-12, this led not only to the closure of the Area 51 branch in Japan, but also to the conclusion of the entire reconnaissance aircraft project. On the last day before returning to America, the pilots took a final photograph next to their aircraft. However, the pictures were not displayed on the walls of their offices, but remained in the CIA archives for 50 years before being declassified along with other program documents. Some A-12 pilots transitioned to the new SR-71 aircraft after the project was shut down, which bore many similarities to its predecessor. Their colleagues were amazed by their skill in piloting this revolutionary aircraft, which had no equals. However, due to the secrecy surrounding the A-12 project, former pilots were unable to share their experiences from 6 years at the controls of such an aircraft with their new comrades. One of the main conspiracy theories associated with Area 51 claims that experiments are conducted there with alien spacecraft. Allegedly, the authorities managed to capture several flying saucers and are now conducting research on them in this secret location near Groom Lake. The primary activities involve reverse engineering, the process of dismantling complex objects to understand how they work and using the acquired knowledge in their own developments. Interestingly, according to Bob Lazar, such activities were part of his responsibilities while working at Area 51, and this information is somewhat consistent with reality. This is what I want to discuss. August 1966, Colonel Munir Reta of the Iraqi Air Force boards a MiG-21 at a military base in southern Iraq and takes off toward Baghdad as part of a routine flight. However, en route, he unexpectedly turns around. Command orders him to return, but Reta, in order to evade radar detection, descends to a few hundred meters and continues his flight. He crosses into Turkish territory, flies over the Mediterranean Sea, and heads toward Tel Aviv, Israel, where $1 million awaits him. Several years earlier, the Israeli Secret Service Mossad began preparing a special operation aimed at acquiring a Soviet MiG-21 fighter jet. The USSR produced high-quality military aircraft, and the MiGs had demonstrated their superiority in a number of military conflicts. For Israel, this situation was problematic, as the Soviet Union supplied these aircraft to their adversaries, Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Understanding the design and capabilities of this modern aircraft could significantly enhance Israel's defense capabilities. After several years of searching, Mossad made contact with Iraqi Air Force pilot Munir Redfa, and he agreed to hijack a MiG-21. The operation was named Operation Diamond, and soon became the subject of headlines in leading global publications and even inspired a Hollywood film. However, journalists were unaware that after studying the design of the MiG, Israel secretly sent the aircraft to the United States to a small military base in Nevada, known as Area 51. Ty Barnes worked on the X-15 rocket plane projects for NASA. After the program was shut down in the late 60s, he was offered a position in a secret project in Nevada. That's how he learned about Area 51. According to him, on his first day of work, he was flown to the base in a plane with covered windows. After landing, the pilot uttered a strange phrase. "They took out the donut." This expression seemed nonsensical until Barnes discovered that donut was the term used at Area 51 to refer to the Soviet MiG-21 due to its distinctive round nose with an empty space inside. Barnes's main task became the reverse engineering of the Soviet aircraft. The MiGs posed significant challenges not only for Israel, but also for the United States. The combat capabilities of these aircraft were clearly demonstrated during the Vietnam War, making the reverse engineering efforts, test flights on the MiGs, and testing of captured Soviet radars at Area 51 critically important for the U.S. during the Cold War. Documents related to these tests were declassified only in the late 2000s. Thus, Bob Lazar's assertion that reverse engineering advanced enemy aircraft was among the priority tasks at Area 51 turned out to be true. In reality, it was about engineering other earthly aircraft and technologies rather than alien spacecraft, which is less intriguing but closer to the truth. Have you ever heard of Area 52? Most likely, many are initially unaware of it. Interestingly, the secret military base in Nevada known as Area 52 was built similarly to Area 51. However, it turned out to be less well known and less imposing in size. There are no theories about the testing of extraterrestrial vessels, discussions of green or gray beings, nor are there films, books, and numerous videos on the internet related to it. Area 52, also known as the Tonopah Test Range, is located about 70 kilometers from Area 51. Both of these places are connected to the ambitious project of the F-117 combat aircraft, nicknamed the Black Hawk. In the early 70s, the U.S. Air Force decided to consolidate all advanced developments implemented in other projects at Area 51, combining high speed, altitude, and radar invisibility with the capability to strike ground targets. Thus, the F-117 attack aircraft was born, with its first tests conducted at Groom Lake. However, it soon became clear that the base's area was insufficient for testing the new aircraft. The Air Force leadership then turned their attention to the Tonopah Test Range. It had been built in the late 50s for bomb testing, but over time, the need for it diminished, and it became partially abandoned. The site was restored and renovated for testing the new F-117 attack aircraft. The Black Hawk successfully underwent numerous tests at this range and subsequently participated in many military conflicts around the world over the next 20 years. An important point arises in this narrative that requires clarification. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, numerous documents related to Area 51 and the projects conducted there were declassified. Thus, the existence of the well-known secret base in Nevada was officially acknowledged, allowing high-ranking officials, including the president, to openly use the term Area 51. However, the declassified materials primarily cover the 1950s, 1960s, and partially the 1970s. Almost all events occurring at Area 51 since the 1980s remain classified. Nevertheless, this does not mean that the video should come to an end, as nothing hinders the imagination. Just kidding. In fact, even before the declassification of documents regarding the U-2 and A-12 projects in the late 2000s, there was already a fairly accurate history of these developments. Journalists interacted with dozens of high-profile employees from Area 51 and documents gradually became publicly accessible. Official representatives from the CIA or the Air Force occasionally made careless statements in interviews, which also provided additional information about the tests being conducted. Later, declassified materials merely confirmed many already known facts about events at Area 51 in the 1950s and 1960s. Thus, we can reconstruct with great confidence what has been hidden at Groom Lake over the past 40 years. The key word in this story is drones. One of the first to recognize the military potential of unmanned vehicles was Nikola Tesla, who even attempted to sell his concept to various defense agencies, but was unsuccessful. During World War II, radio-controlled bombs launched from aircraft were used in the United States, which can be considered a precursor to drones. Although the technology did not seem particularly effective at the time, some military officials foresaw its future. General Henry Arnold asserted during the war that the next global confrontation would be conducted using drones. While he was mistaken about the timing, over the course of several wars and decades, he ultimately turned out to be correct. The CIA began developing a reconnaissance drone project at Area 51 in the early 1960s based on the A-12 aircraft. This modification, known as the M-21, was equipped with the unmanned aerial vehicle D-21. The aircraft would deliver the drone to a designated point and launch it, after which the drone would carry out its photographic mission and head toward the ocean, where it would land on the water for subsequent retrieval by American military forces. Testing was conducted at Area 51, but the project did not last long. The first mission in China ended in failure when the D-21 mistakenly crossed into Soviet airspace and crashed. As a result, drones were sidelined for several decades. The CIA continued to develop drone projects that mimicked birds, but the high costs of their development and production, along with their ambiguous effectiveness, meant that the priority remained with manned aircraft. The situation changed in the 1990s, when the CIA and the Air Force recognized the reconnaissance and combat potential of unmanned vehicles. This refers to projects such as the MQ-1 Predator and MQ-9 Reaper, which were also tested at Area 51. These drones played a key role in numerous military conflicts over the past 20 years, including the fight against terrorism, during which many leaders of terrorist groups, including bin Laden, were eliminated with their assistance. To this day, it is unknown what weapons or technologies are being developed at Area 51. Most likely, the details will only become known in 50 years. This is not only about ordinary citizens, but even high-ranking officials, such as the President of the United States. I mentioned that many projects at Area 51 were so classified that only the presidential administration was informed, while, for example, the Vice President remained in the dark. And this is not the limit of secrecy. The situation that occurred in 1994 vividly demonstrates the level of secrecy surrounding Area 51. At that time, President Bill Clinton ordered an investigation into some controversial nuclear tests at the Nevada test site. However, details concerning Area 51 were excluded from the Commission's findings, as even the President did not have sufficient access to that information. This place remains highly classified. A no-fly zone is established over the base, and access to secured areas is strictly controlled. As a result, a multitude of conspiracy theories emerged, the overwhelming majority of which are related to Area 51. It is worth revisiting the 1989 interview with Bob Lazar, which we began with, as it played a key role in popularizing this location. Bob Lazar claimed that in the early 1980s, he worked at the Los Alamos Scientific Nuclear Laboratory, established 40 years prior for the Manhattan Project. It was there that he allegedly met scientist Edward Teller. 8 years later, when Lazar faced difficulties with his job, it was Teller who found him a position in a secret project, which led Bob to the Area 51 site. According to his claims, this was the S4 laboratory, part of the area. It housed 9 extraterrestrial flying saucers that Lazar was to study using reverse engineering. He was also shown images of beings resembling aliens who were purportedly the pilots of these crafts. Later, Lazar accidentally saw real small gray beings with large heads who were being kept under guard in a special chamber. After the man witnessed more than he was supposed to, he was allegedly fired from Area 51. Realizing the significance of his observations, he decided to speak out and gave an interview to a television station in Las Vegas. Soon, compromising facts from his biography emerged. He had a criminal record for pimping, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology denied Lazar's claims that he had studied there. He sold the rights to his story to a major Hollywood studio, then disappeared for a while and returned to the media with the same assertions. As a result, his figure remains highly controversial. Lazar has become a symbol of one of the main conspiracy theories associated with Area 51. Let's analyze whether his words hold any substance. In his defense, it can be noted that he has been consistent in his claims for over 30 years. In all interviews, he confidently shares his story, does not contradict himself, and does not confuse the facts. Lazar's supporters, including him, claim that the compromising facts from his biography were staged by the CIA as part of a disinformation campaign to portray him as a madman or a mythomaniac who never worked at Area 51 and lacks the appropriate education. Can intelligence agencies operate in such a manner? Theoretically, yes. This is the main argument in Lazar's defense. On the other side are the arguments against Lazar. He is the sole source of his story, and there are no other witnesses to corroborate his claims about the gray aliens, the 9 flying saucers, and the mysterious laboratory at Area 51. There is not even any evidence of his employment in that area. Annie Jacobson, the author of one of the most detailed books about the Groom Lake military base, conducted interviews with 70 participants in projects at Area 51, half of whom worked there directly. None of them confirmed having met Bob Lazar. Moreover, even among ufologists, many consider him a fraud. One such critic, scientist Stanton Friedman, is known for his research on the Roswell incident, where he claims that it involved an extraterrestrial object. To clarify, it is important to emphasize the following. There is currently no compelling evidence, verified by multiple independent sources, that extraterrestrial spacecraft or beings have ever been present or are present on the military base at Area 51. In addition to the theory about extraterrestrials, there are 2 other widespread conspiracy theories associated with Area 51. One claims that it was there that the footage of the American moon landing was staged, while the other suggests the existence of tunnels that supposedly assist high-ranking U.S. officials in the event of a nuclear war. Despite the absurdity of both hypotheses, they are based on some real facts. Firstly, the participants of the lunar expedition underwent physical training near Area 51 at a testing site where craters resembling the lunar landscape were formed after nuclear explosions. This allowed the astronauts to better prepare for what awaited them during the mission. Finally, the second point. Tunnels do exist, but they are not located within Area 51. Rather, they are situated beneath other sections of the Nevada testing range. As mentioned earlier, this range was primarily established for nuclear testing, which was conducted deep underground in specialized tunnels. There are indeed many tunnels in this area, but none of them lead to Washington. An ideal conclusion to this video would be a short story. In August 1783 in France, the Montgolfier brothers were conducting one of the first tests of their hot air balloon when it was struck by lightning. The balloon caught fire and began to fall toward a small village. Seeing the burning object approaching from the sky, the locals perceived it as an otherworldly being. Some fled in panic, while others rushed to the crash site and began to attack it with pitchforks and scythes. This situation vividly illustrates what happens to people when their understanding lags behind technology. This is the essence of the myth surrounding Area 51.